club. Welcome all indigenous people of all nations, though. Oh, hello. First, I wanted to introduce our honorary guest. Her name is Anne Lewis. She's Aborigine from Australia. Well, her background is Aborigine from Australia. She has some poetry for you guys today. Go ahead and welcome people who are working for Anne Lewis.
I'm also coming up the sound. Is that okay? Okay, so I'm looking out here at a sea of faces and I'm seeing my students, past, present, and hopefully future. I was told last semester by one of my students that I look like a generic white woman. Though I hate to think of myself as being generic anything, that is kind of how I look. But looks can be deceiving. So today I'm going to share my story with you, and I have a poem that I'm going to finish with. I grew up in white Australia. At that time when I was growing up, we had a white Australia policy. No one could come into Australia to live unless they were from white European descent. We were expected to be and act like little British people. We were expected to look for our roots in England and Europe. And I did that. I left Australia when I was 19 and I traveled the world. And I found those generic white woman roots in England, in Europe, but I always felt like there was something missing. In 2000, my sister and I went to Western Queensland in Australia to look at the graves of our ancestors. And at the cemetery, we looked for George Henry Mitchell, my great-grandfather. We were told that my great-grandfather was buried alongside of my great-grandmother. So we found this huge burial plot, marble tombstone, wrought iron around the grave, with a great big heading that said George Henry Mitchell. But we couldn't see my great-grandmother until we looked down on the ground, and about 6 inches by 4 inches there was a tiny little plaque that said Mary Mitchell. We went to the county clerk's office to ask them why. Why do we have this juxtaposition of a great marble tombstone and a little tiny 6-inch plaque? We were told that it was because she was Native Australian, the original Aboriginal. So there was the part of me that was missing. I suppose I should have known growing up that there was that other side of me, because my father's family never truly accepted my mother. And my mother had been a nurse, and when we lived in little tiny towns in Western Australia, she would take me to the Aboriginal camps on the edge of town whenever there was a newborn or whenever somebody was sick. But it was kind of like we had to sneak around to see it, okay? In 2002, having discovered this new part of my culture, I went to Central Australia. Has anyone heard of that great big rock that's right in the middle? Big red rock. Used to be called Ayers Rock in days gone by. It was named after the first British explorer to see it. The Australian government gave it back to the Aboriginal people about 10 years ago, and it then got the name of Uluru, which is Aboriginal. So I have some notes here, okay? It was on my discovery of my great-grandmother and the rock that I realized I wasn't just a generic white woman, that there was that part of me that was connected to the land. What gets me about Indigenous people around the world is there are a lot of beliefs in common. And when I start to read these beliefs that the Aboriginal people have, you'll see how these tie into Native Americans and natives from all parts of the world. The Aboriginal people have an earthbound philosophy. They believe that the earth gives to man food, language, intelligence. That, by the way, is a didgeridoo, which also comes from the land. It wasn't originally a man-made instrument. It was a hollowed tree limb that the termites had eaten the hollow, and this sound comes about by blowing through the hollow tree limb. The Aboriginal people also believe that the earth takes us back when we die. Therefore, our country is sacred, and it must remain unscarred. Aboriginals tread lightly over the earth, believing that the less they take from it, the less they will have to give back. We also have, as part of our creation myth, the song lines. And although Australia is a great vast land with not very many people living in it, these song lines crisscross the country and they all go back over the rock. The song lines are from the dream time. It's the Aboriginal equivalent of the first two books from Genesis, with a difference. In Genesis, God first created the living things and then fashioned Adam out of clay. In the Aboriginal myth, the ancestors fashioned themselves out of clay and then created thousands of other people like them. In Aboriginal lore, the ancestors created themselves from clay. Okay, and the others. Whoops, did we lose them? No. My totem, for want of a better word, is wallaby. When an Aboriginal says, I have a wallaby dreaming, it means that we can lead back to our ancestors, to the original creators. Every wallaby believes that he or she is descended from a universal wallaby father, who was the ancestor of all other wallabies. Now, do we know what a wallaby is? A little tiny kangaroo. It looks like a kangaroo, but it's a little thing, okay? So, of course, if we're all descended from wallabies, we can't kill them and eat them for food, because that's cannibalism. Each totemic ancestor, the wallabies, the goannas, the snakes, the claws, while traveling through the country, scattered trails of words and music across Australia. These dreaming tracks are a way for tribes and groups to communicate with each other. By singing the world into existence, the ancestors had been poets in the original sense. Poet meaning creator. When I was growing up as a generic white woman, my family, for the most part, looked down on the Aboriginals, and they were talked about with disdain. When people were unfortunate enough to hire Aboriginals, they would complain that the Aboriginals would go on walkabout, which means they would just pick up at any time and take off from the job, implying that they were lazy people. But what they were doing in these walkabouts was crisscrossing the country, following the song lines of their ancestors. They were singing the songs of the ancestors in order to recreate the country, because we believe that you can't see and know the country until you can sing it. And I have a little quote here from someone that I talked to. He was a foreman in the middle of Australia, and his crew consisted of Aboriginals. They would go out and work on the roads in the middle of nowhere. And he said that he'd be driving the men through the desert. They'd come to a ridge of sandhills, and suddenly all the workers would start singing. And he would say to them, "What are you mobs singing?" And they would say, "We're singing up the country, boss. Makes the country come up quicker." So to see the country, they had to sing it. I'm still discovering this part of me, this culture, and it's going to take me a long time to find it all. But I don't believe anymore that I am a generic white woman. I left Australia when I was 19, looking for my ancestry, looking for my roots, looking for my dreaming, only to discover that it was in my backyard the whole time. The poem that I'm going to read for you expresses this journey. I am an English teacher. We do have to read out poetry. But you do need to understand that the myth for creation, the time before existence, is called the dream time, and our dreaming is our ancestors. So here's my poem. It's called Rock Climbers Uluru 2002. First hour in Athens, jet-lagged, raw eyes watering in the gritty wind, I stood on the Acropolis and knew